Look at the leg, no armour, skin and scale, one stride from a hooded Cape Cobra. That venom kills by paralysis. Researchers screened 148 animals for the mutation that blocks it. Honey badgers have it. No bird does, and the researchers pointed straight at the two that hunt snakes for a living. 4 feet tall, inches from the strike. What venom grabs onto in this bird is the same as yours. You're right that this shouldn't work. It does anyway, but not for the reason you think. The bird is a secretary bird. 4 feet of leg and feather walking the African grassland. One of a handful of African birds that specialize in hunting snakes, and the only one that does it on foot. Another of them is the black-chested snake eagle. Both sat inside that 148 animal search, a sweep across most of the backboned tree. Neither carries the resistance.
So here's the paradox in one sentence. An animal that built a career on the one venom class its own body has no answer to. If nothing inside this bird can stop the venom, what has been stopping it? Because there is an answer, and it isn't in the blood or the skin. It's in what the bird does before the snake ever gets a vote. And the first piece of it is something you already have, sitting in the front of your own skull.
Whatever is keeping this bird alive, it has to be doing its work outside the body. So start with the part everyone has already seen. You know this clip. A tall grey bird brings a leg down on a snake, again and again, like someone breaking ice with a heel. It looks like brute force. It looks like the bird is simply tougher than the snake. When researchers put a force plate under that kick, they got a peak of 195 newtons, about 5 times the bird's own body weight. A 5-year-old arriving all at once on one point. Contact time, 15 milliseconds. A blink takes 150. The kick is a tenth of a blink. That's fast enough to matter twice. It's fast enough to kill a snake, and it's far too fast for the bird to steer. 15 milliseconds is under the bird's own reaction time. It cannot feel the leg land and adjust. It aims with its eyes, commits, and whatever happens, happens. A miss isn't corrected. A miss is answered by the next kick. Here's where almost everyone goes wrong. Watching that, you assume the bird can afford it because it's immune, venom-proof, honey badger style, built to take a bite and shrug. It isn't. Nothing in this bird's blood or its cells is doing anything at all. The reason is almost unfair. A cobra's neurotoxin docks onto one exact spot, the receptor that tells your muscles to contract. That spot is nearly identical in almost every backboned animal, and it has to be. The parts that would block the toxin are the same parts that make the muscle work at all. It's like asking for a lock that won't take a key and still opens. Evolution was never offered a free version. So, nothing inside, which leaves outside. And if you're already wondering what outside could possibly buy you against a thing that only needs one touch, that's exactly the right question. Before any of that, one animal on this channel got the other answer entirely. The honey badger's version of that receptor is rebuilt. The neurotoxin arrives and the docking site is the wrong shape. It solved the same problem from the inside. Keep that in your pocket, because by the end of this, you're going to want to know what it cost. Start with the eyes. Set forward in the skull the way a hunter's eyes are. Depth, distance, and the kind of eyesight a bird of prey needs to pull a thin, dark line out of dry grass while it is still a long way off. Nobody has measured this bird's visual field, but at 15 milliseconds, nothing but sight can be doing the aiming. And that's the thing worth getting right. It isn't that this bird sees well, it's when it sees. Every single defense this animal has is made of time, and sight is the part that buys the time. Then the legs. The longest of any bird of prey, and that isn't a decoration, it's the whole argument. A snake's strike has a fixed reach. It reaches as far as it reaches, and not 1 inch further. So a snake that gets walked up on is fighting at a distance it never picked. It is facing something that stands just outside the only move it owns. Which means the strike happens anyway. It throws its whole body forward, mouth open, and closes on nothing. Fully extended, still committed, still coming back. That was the entire plan, and the foot arrives from a place the strike was never able to reach. And then there's the leg itself, which is where this gets strange. The lower leg is heavily scaled, thick, overlapping plates. Above it, the thigh is densely feathered. Researchers name both as physical barriers against the snake's bite. So there is armour on this bird. It's just on the outside of it, doing the one job armour can do here, stopping the tooth before it ever reaches anything that matters. And that's the part worth sitting still for. Everything else in this animal is motion, milliseconds, distance, a gap held open by walking. This is the one piece that does nothing at all. It doesn't react, it doesn't aim, it doesn't have to be fast, it just has to be there. And underneath the scale, there's very little to bite into. Down there, a bird's leg is mostly tendon and bone, not the blood-rich muscle a mammal's leg is packed with. Researchers think that may slow how far venom could travel, if any ever got in. Nobody has shown that it does. It's a possible bonus, sitting on top of a system built so it never has to be collected. Which raises the obvious question, why go to all this trouble? Just evolve the badger's version and stop worrying about it. That's because the badger's version comes with an invoice. A poison frog that rebuilt a related receptor to survive its own toxin took the hit first. On its own, that one change left the receptor worse at reading its actual signal. The frog only got to keep it by evolving a second set of changes to undo the damage. It paid twice. A fly given an insecticide resistance mutation in the lab came out worse off than the flies without it. And then there's the European adder. In that entire 148 animal search, it is the only species that carried that same change and then reversed it. And it did that after moving north, into latitudes where the snakes it would have protected against don't live. Researchers read that as a hint that the lock isn't free to carry. An animal keeps a defense like that while it needs it. It loses it when it doesn't. So that's the machine. Eyes, distance, armor, and a strike too fast to answer. A whole animal assembled so that the question of venom never actually comes up. Which is a beautiful system, right until you ask how much of it anyone has ever actually watched happen. Here's where the outside answer starts to look thin. Every number in this video, the 195 newtons, the 15 milliseconds, the 10th of a blink, comes from one bird. His name is Madeline, a 24-year-old captive male at a conservancy in Hampshire, kicking a rubber snake 45 times across 14 trials over 2 days of recording. That is all the evidence there is behind the most repeated fact about this species. Researchers think that may slow how far venom could travel, if any ever got in. Nobody has shown that it does. It's a possible bonus, sitting on top of a system built so it never has to be collected. Which raises the obvious question, why go to all this trouble? Just evolve the badger's version and stop worrying about it. That's because the badger's version comes with an invoice. A poison frog that rebuilt a related receptor to survive its own toxin took the hit first. On its own, that one change left the receptor worse at reading its actual signal. The frog only got to keep it by evolving a second set of changes to undo the damage. It paid twice. A fly given an insecticide resistance mutation in the lab came out worse off than the flies without it. And then there's the European adder. In that entire 148 animal search, it is the only species that carried that same change and then reversed it. And it did that after moving north, into latitudes where the snakes it would have protected against don't live. Researchers read that as a hint that the lock isn't free to carry. An animal keeps a defense like that while it needs it. It loses it when it doesn't. So that's the machine. Eyes, distance, armor, and a strike too fast to answer. A whole animal assembled so that the question of venom never actually comes up. Which is a beautiful system, right until you ask how much of it anyone has ever actually watched happen. Here's where the outside answer starts to look thin. Every number in this video, the 195 newtons, the 15 milliseconds, the 10th of a blink, comes from one bird. His name is Madeline, a 24-year-old captive male at a conservancy in Hampshire, kicking a rubber snake 45 times across 14 trials over 2 days of recording. That is all the evidence there is behind the most repeated fact about this species. Which is worth sitting with because you are carrying a shelf full of these. Somewhere in your head, right now, is a fact you would defend at a dinner table that traces back to exactly one thing you saw once, and you have never gone back to check where it came from. The story is always bigger than the measurement. This bird just happens to have a famous one. So, does the sequence ever fail? Yes. Vets recorded a case series of 18 birds of prey that came in envenomated. 6 of them died without antivenom treatment. One of them was a California condor. Birds die of snakebite. Note what that is, though. North American raptors, North American snakes, animals already in a clinic. It is not a measurement of wild secretary birds. What it is the plain thing underneath all of this. None of what you've watched is immunity. It is a sequence, and sequences can go wrong. And then the detail that should break the story and instead explains it. Most of what a secretary bird actually eats isn't snakes. It's grasshoppers and small ground prey, the kind of thing that never makes a documentary because it isn't a fight. The snake killer is a part-time snake killer, which is exactly what you would predict for an animal with no biochemical fallback. You don't take that risk daily if you don't have to. The specialization is real. The frequency is a decision, which is a strategy that has worked for a long, long time, and it is being taken apart by something the bird was never built to walk away from. Go back to the leg. Skin and scale. One stride from a hooded cobra and nothing inside it worth the name. That bird is now listed as endangered, the second highest risk category on the international extinction list, one step below critically endangered. Look at Kenya's standardized road surveys. Between the surveys of the 1970s and those run from 2003 onward, the rate at which anyone encountered a secretary bird fell by around 94%. That is not a head count, it is how often one turns up in front of you. Roughly 1 now for every 17 you would have passed then. And none of that is snakes. It's grassland turned to farmland. Power lines. If nothing inside this bird can stop the venom, what has been stopping it? Time. Distance. A gap it could always choose. A bird that has never once needed to survive a bite because it has never once needed to be caught. So which one sits worse with you? A molecular lock so old and so essential that almost nothing alive has ever been allowed to change it? Or an animal that beat every snake it ever met and is being erased by something it can't outwalk? Tell me which one. And if you've ever seen one of these birds yourself, out in the field, I want to hear about it. Because some animals do solve this from the inside, and not one of them does it for nothing. Every one of them gives up something, and it is never the thing you would have guessed. It never needed to be tough. It only ever needed to be early, and for the first time, it isn't.